Racist cop orders two black men to leave, then they quietly show him who they really are. Sometimes, the decisions we make in a matter of seconds reveal more about our character than years of experience ever could. What begins as an ordinary breakfast inside a quiet diner soon becomes a moment that forces everyone in the room to question their assumptions about respect, fairness, and first impressions. Some stories end with answers. Others leave us asking better questions. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Now, let's step inside a small Georgia diner, where one ordinary morning is about to become unforgettable. The most dangerous mistake a person can make is believing they already know who deserves respect. The morning sun had barely climbed above the pine trees when Maple Corner Diner began filling with the familiar rhythm of small-town Georgia. Coffee cups clinked against ceramic saucers, waitresses greeted regular customers by name, and the smell of fresh biscuits, bacon, and scrambled eggs drifted through the dining room. Outside, pickup trucks and family sedans lined the parking lot while travelers from Interstate 75 stopped for breakfast before continuing their journeys. Everything about the place felt ordinary, the kind of restaurant where strangers shared polite smiles before returning to their own conversations. At a booth near the front window, two black men stepped inside together after parking a dark sport utility vehicle across the lot. Marcus Bennett, wearing a neatly pressed navy button-down shirt beneath a lightweight sport coat, carried himself with quiet confidence that attracted little attention beyond simple curiosity. Beside him walked Isaiah Brooks, dressed just as professionally in a charcoal jacket over a light blue shirt, his calm expression reflecting years of discipline and patience. They greeted the hostess politely, thanked her for seating them, and ordered coffee while waiting for breakfast. Their voices remained low as they spoke about ordinary things, avoiding anything that might draw attention. To everyone else in the diner, they appeared to be two professionals enjoying a peaceful meal before another. Busy workday. The waitress returned with steaming mugs of coffee and smiled warmly as Marcus thanked her. Through the large front windows, sunlight reflected across polished chrome bumpers and the American flag outside the diner gently moved in the morning breeze. It was the kind of peaceful scene that seemed completely untouched by conflict. Then the front door opened once again. Officer Ryan Mercer entered wearing a crisp police uniform, his badge catching the sunlight as conversations throughout the restaurant briefly paused in quiet acknowledgement before continuing. Several regular customers greeted him with friendly nods. Ryan answered with practiced confidence while scanning the room with experienced eyes. His attention settled almost immediately on Marcus and Isaiah. He remained standing for several seconds, studying them without speaking. The waitress noticed his stare but continued pouring coffee for another table. Ryan slowly walked toward their booth, his boots echoing softly across the polished floor. Marcus looked up first and offered a courteous smile. Isaiah followed with a respectful nod. Neither man appeared nervous. Neither looked surprised by the officer's approach. Ryan stopped beside their table and folded his arms across his chest. The warmth that filled the diner only moments earlier seemed to fade beneath the silence that settled around nearby customers. Without introducing himself or asking a single question, Ryan spoke in a firm voice that carried farther than necessary. "You two need to finish up somewhere else." Marcus blinked once, certain he had misunderstood. "Excuse me, officer." Ryan's expression never changed. "I said you need to leave this diner." Several conversations stopped completely. A fork rested motionless halfway between a plate and a customer's mouth. The elderly couple near the counter exchanged uncertain glances. Even the waitress froze for a moment with the coffee pot still in her hand. Marcus remained seated, his voice calm and respectful. "May I ask why?" Ryan looked directly at him before answering without hesitation. "Because I do not believe you belong here." The word settled over the dining room like a sudden winter wind. Marcus quietly placed his coffee cup back onto the table without spilling a single drop. Isaiah remained equally composed, meeting Ryan's eyes without anger or fear. Around them, every person in the diner could feel that breakfast had just become something none of them would ever forget. Marcus Bennett did not answer immediately. He simply looked at Officer Ryan Mercer with the same steady expression he had worn since entering the diner, making certain he had heard every word correctly before responding. Around them, the quiet conversations that had filled the restaurant only moments earlier disappeared into complete silence. Only the faint hum of the ceiling fans and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen remained. Marcus finally spoke in a calm, respectful voice. "Officer, my friend and I came here for breakfast. We were welcomed by the hostess, we ordered our meal, and we have not disturbed anyone. May I ask why you want us to leave?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "I do not owe you an explanation. I am giving you a lawful order. Leave." Isaiah Brooks remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed, allowing Marcus to continue. The waitress, unable to ignore what she was seeing, stepped forward carefully. "Officer Mercer," she said politely, "they have been respectful since they walked in. There has not been a single complaint." Ryan barely looked at her. "Please return to your work. This does not concern you." She hesitated before stepping back, her concern obvious. Nearby customers began exchanging uneasy glances. An elderly veteran quietly lowered his coffee cup while a young family stopped eating altogether. Marcus never raised his voice. "Officer, if we have violated a law or the restaurant has asked us to leave, we will cooperate immediately. We are simply asking what rule we have broken." Ryan's expression hardened. "You are asking too many questions." Marcus answered with the same courtesy. "Respectfully, I am asking only one." A few customers looked at one another. Ryan had expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but instead he was met with patience that only seemed to frustrate him further. Determined to reassert control, he stepped closer to the booth. "You have two choices," he said firmly. "Walk out on your own, or I will handle this another way." Marcus slowly placed both hands on the table where everyone could see them. "Officer Mercer, we intend to cooperate with every lawful instruction. We simply believe we should understand the reason before surrendering the rights every citizen is entitled to." Hearing his own name spoken so calmly caught Ryan off guard for only a moment. He scanned the dining room, expecting silent approval. Instead, he noticed customers watching with growing concern. A middle-aged man quietly activated the camera on his cell phone beneath the edge of the table. The cook leaned through the kitchen window, while the owner stepped out from the back after noticing the dining room had fallen completely silent. For the first time that morning, Ryan realized every word and every decision was unfolding before a room full of witnesses. Rather than easing the tension, the realization only strengthened his resolve. He looked directly at Marcus and spoke more firmly than before. "I am done discussing this. Since you refuse to leave voluntarily, my next step will be to determine exactly who you are." Marcus held his gaze without the slightest trace of hostility. Then, he replied quietly, "I hope your next step is one you are completely certain about." For several long seconds, nobody moved. Breakfast plates remained untouched, and every pair of eyes inside the diner stayed fixed on the booth near the front window. Officer Ryan Mercer looked around the room once more, expecting someone to support his authority. Instead, he found only uneasy silence. The lack of support seemed to harden his resolve. He reached toward the notebook on his duty belt before looking directly at Marcus Bennett. "I am going to need identification from both of you," he said firmly. Marcus nodded politely. "Officer, before I answer that request, may I ask whether we are being detained?" Ryan frowned. "I asked you a question." Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. "And I asked mine." Isaiah Brooks remained composed beside him, saying nothing, his quiet confidence contrasting sharply with the growing tension throughout the restaurant. Ryan took another step closer. "You are refusing to cooperate." Marcus gently shook his head. "Respectfully, we have cooperated from the moment we arrived. We simply wish to understand the legal basis for your request." Ryan extended his hand. "Driver's licenses." "Right now." Marcus remained calm. "Are we suspected of committing a crime?" "You are refusing a lawful order," Ryan replied. Marcus answered evenly. "We were asked to leave without being told why. We have not disturbed anyone, violated any policy, or refused any lawful instruction. A quiet murmur spread through the diner. Near the counter, the hostess discreetly checked the security monitor while a delivery driver near the entrance quietly began recording with his cell phone. At that moment, the owner of the diner stepped forward. Wiping his hands on a clean towel, he addressed the officer respectfully. "Officer Mercer, these gentlemen are my customers. Unless there is something I do not know, they have been courteous from the moment they walked in." Ryan turned toward him. "Sir, I suggest you let law enforcement handle this." The owner hesitated before answering with equal respect. "This is my business, officer. If they have broken a rule, I would appreciate knowing which one." The question lingered unanswered. Ryan looked back at Marcus, visibly irritated that the conversation was no longer going the way he expected. "Fine," he said firmly. "If you will not identify yourselves voluntarily, I will determine exactly who you are myself." Marcus held his gaze with the same calm expression. "You are free to make whatever decision you believe is appropriate, officer." Around the diner, the atmosphere shifted again. What had begun as a simple request for two customers to leave had now become a public test of judgment, with every witness silently watching to see what Officer Ryan Mercer would do next. Ryan Mercer reached toward the radio clipped to his shoulder, then paused. For reasons even he could not explain, he decided against calling for another officer. Pride told him he could handle the situation himself. He looked at Marcus Bennett and Isaiah Brooks. Once again, searching for the slightest sign of uncertainty. He found none. Marcus remained seated with both hands resting openly on the table beside his untouched coffee. Isaiah quietly watched the officer without saying a word. Outside, the morning sun continued shining across the parking lot, a peaceful scene that felt completely disconnected from the growing tension inside the diner. Ryan finally spoke. "I have asked you to leave. I have requested identification. Instead, all I have received are questions." Marcus answered with the same calm voice. "Every question has been asked respectfully, Officer Mercer. We simply wish to understand why we are being treated differently from every other customer in this restaurant." Ryan folded his arms. "You are making assumptions." Marcus nodded slightly. "Then I would appreciate the opportunity to be corrected." The owner remained quietly near the counter while customers continued watching in complete silence. No one interrupted. No one encouraged either side. The entire diner seemed to be waiting for Ryan's next decision. He stepped closer to the booth. "This conversation is over. Stand up and leave." Marcus glanced briefly toward Isaiah, who answered with a slight nod before Marcus returned his attention to the officer. "Officer Mercer," Marcus said calmly, "before either of us makes another decision, may I ask one final question?" Ryan sighed impatiently. "One question." Marcus spoke quietly enough that the entire room leaned in to listen. "If two other customers had walked into this diner this morning, ordered the same breakfast, followed every rule, and treated everyone with the same respect, would you have asked them to leave?" The question hung in the air. Ryan looked around the dining room, aware that every customer was waiting for his answer. After several seconds, he replied, "That question is not relevant." Marcus held his gaze. "I believe it is the only question that truly matters." Ryan's patience finally broke. "Enough." His voice rose noticeably. "I am giving you one last opportunity to comply before I take further action." Marcus did not argue. He did not move. Instead, he looked directly at Ryan and spoke with complete sincerity. "Officer Mercer, I sincerely hope that whatever you decide next is a decision you will still be comfortable defending after every witness in this room has been heard." Ryan answered without hesitation. "I will." Marcus gave a respectful nod. "Thank you. That is all I needed to know." Around the diner, no one fully understood why those words suddenly changed the atmosphere. They only knew that, for the first time that morning, it no longer felt as though Marcus and Isaiah were being tested. It felt as though Officer Ryan Mercer had quietly begun testing himself without realizing it. There are moments when the strongest person in the room is not the one speaking the loudest, but the one who already understands that patience often reveals more than confrontation ever can. Marcus Bennett slowly lowered his hand from the inside pocket of his sport coat without removing anything. Isaiah Brooks noticed the movement immediately and answered with the slightest nod before returning his attention to Officer Ryan Mercer. The silent exchange lasted less than a second, escaping everyone else's notice. Ryan interpreted their composure as stubbornness. He remained convinced that two ordinary customers were refusing to respect his authority. What he could not understand was why neither man showed the slightest trace of fear, frustration, or urgency. Most people facing that kind of pressure would have argued, apologized, or walked away. Marcus and Isaiah did none of those things. They simply remained calm, giving Ryan every opportunity to reconsider his own decisions. Around the diner, the uneasy silence deepened. No forks touched porcelain. No coffee cups were lifted. Even the waitress, still standing near the coffee station, found herself watching instead of working. The owner remained quietly behind the counter with his arms folded, saying nothing. Without anyone realizing it, the room had stopped waiting to see whether Marcus would lose his composure. They were waiting to see whether Officer Ryan Mercer would. Marcus looked toward Ryan once again. "Officer Mercer," he said quietly, "before this goes any further, I would like to offer you one final opportunity to resolve this conversation respectfully." Ryan answered without hesitation. "The opportunity has already been given." "You refused it." Marcus gently shook his head. "Respectfully, we have refused nothing. I am simply asking whether you would like to reconsider before taking your next step." Several customers exchanged puzzled looks. The wording sounded unusually deliberate, although no one understood why. The waitress glanced at the untouched breakfasts growing cold on the table, wondering how an ordinary morning had reached this point without anyone raising a voice. Ryan remained unmoved. "There is nothing to reconsider," he replied. "You have delayed this long enough." For the first time in several minutes, Isaiah spoke. His voice was calm and almost conversational. "Marcus, I believe the officer has made his decision." Marcus looked at him briefly before giving a slight nod. "I believe he has." Ryan watched the two men carefully, sensing that something had shifted without understanding what it was. To him, it still felt as though he was in complete control of the encounter. Around the diner, every witness remained silent. No one realized that the most important part of the morning was no longer what Ryan might do next. It was the fact that Officer Ryan Mercer had now been given every reasonable opportunity to choose a different path, and with every decision, he had quietly chosen not to. The room had become so quiet that the ticking clock above the counter seemed louder than the conversations that had disappeared minutes earlier. Officer Ryan Mercer rested one hand on his duty belt, convinced that Marcus Bennett and Isaiah Brooks had been testing his authority from the very beginning. He looked from one man to the other before speaking with deliberate confidence. "This is over. I am directing both of you to identify yourselves immediately." Marcus remained seated, his untouched breakfast still resting in front of him. He met Ryan's eyes with the same calm expression he had worn since the encounter began. "Officer Mercer," he said quietly, "before I comply, I want to ask you one final thing. Are you completely confident that every decision you have made this morning reflects the standards of the department you represent?" Ryan answered without the slightest hesitation. "Absolutely." Marcus studied him for a brief moment, as though offering one final opportunity to reconsider. None came. Ryan extended his hand once more. "Identification. Right now." Around the diner, no one moved. The elderly veteran leaned forward slightly. The waitress stood frozen beside the coffee station, still holding the empty pot. Near the entrance, the delivery driver continued recording while the owner quietly watched from behind the counter, realizing that whatever happened next would be remembered long after breakfast was over. Marcus gave a small nod. "Very well, officer. You are about to receive exactly what you have requested." Ryan interpreted the answer as reluctant compliance. "That would have saved everyone a great deal of time if you had done it sooner." Marcus offered a faint, almost sympathetic smile. Perhaps, he replied quietly. Or perhaps the time was necessary. Ryan frowned, unable to understand what Marcus meant. Isaiah calmly reached toward the inside of his sport coat but stopped, waiting for Marcus to move first. Marcus then slipped one hand inside his own jacket with slow, deliberate movements that left no room for misunderstanding. Every eye inside the diner followed his hand. No forks touched a plate. No coffee cups were lifted. The silence itself seemed to hold its breath. Ryan watched closely, fully expecting an ordinary driver's license. Instead, Marcus removed a slim black leather credential holder and placed it gently on the table without opening it. He rested his fingertips on the closed case before looking directly at Ryan one final time. "Officer Mercer," he said with complete sincerity, "everything that has happened here today has been the result of your own decisions. I simply ask that you remember that before you see what is inside." No one spoke. Every witness stared at the unopened credential holder resting on the table, unaware that the next few seconds were about to change the meaning of everything they had witnessed that morning. Marcus Bennett let the silence linger for one final heartbeat before opening the black leather credential holder. The movement was slow, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. The polished federal badge caught the morning light pouring through the diner windows, followed by an official identification card bearing his photograph, name, and credentials. Before anyone could fully absorb what they were seeing, Isaiah Brooks calmly placed an identical credential holder on the table and opened it beside Marcus's. 2 federal badges rested side by side between untouched breakfast plates and cooling cups of coffee. For the first time that morning, Officer Ryan Mercer's confidence disappeared completely. His eyes moved from one badge to the other, then back to Marcus's face, searching for some explanation that would restore the certainty he had carried only seconds before. Marcus spoke first, his voice remaining as calm as it had been since the beginning. "Special Agent Marcus Bennett." He gently turned the credential so Ryan could read every line without obstruction. Isaiah followed in the same composed manner. "Special Agent Isaiah Brooks." Neither man raised his voice. Neither displayed satisfaction. They simply presented the truth that had been available all along, waiting only for the appropriate moment to be revealed. Ryan instinctively leaned forward to examine the credentials more closely. His expression shifted from disbelief to recognition as he carefully read the seals and official markings. He understood immediately that these were not ceremonial badges or ordinary credentials. They identified 2 experienced federal investigators whose authority extended far beyond the assumptions he had made when they first walked through the diner's front door. Around the restaurant, quiet gasps spread from table to table. The elderly veteran slowly removed his cap as though witnessing something solemn rather than dramatic. The waitress covered her mouth in astonishment before looking toward the owner, who stood frozen behind the counter. Even the delivery driver lowered his telephone for a brief moment, unable to believe what had just unfolded before quietly raising it again. Marcus carefully closed his credential holder and rested it on the table. "Officer Mercer," he said with complete professionalism, "we did not enter this diner intending to identify ourselves. We stopped for breakfast while traveling to an official meeting. Our assignment required us to maintain a low profile unless circumstances made identification necessary." Ryan remained speechless. Every confident instruction he had issued only moments earlier now echoed inside his own mind with a very different meaning. Marcus continued without accusation. "From the moment we entered this establishment, we addressed everyone respectfully. We followed every instruction that was lawful, asked reasonable questions, and repeatedly offered opportunities to resolve this encounter without unnecessary escalation." Isaiah looked calmly around the room before speaking for the first time since revealing his credentials. "Every customer here has witnessed exactly what occurred. Their observations matter just as much as ours." Ryan finally found his voice, though it sounded noticeably quieter than before. I was not aware." Marcus gently interrupted him. "No, officer. You were not aware of who we were. But that was never the important question." Ryan looked at him with growing uncertainty. Marcus's expression remained composed. The important question is how you would have treated us if these credentials had never existed. Those words settled over the diner with greater weight than the badges themselves. No one spoke. No one moved. In that moment, every person inside the restaurant understood that the true measure of authority had never been hidden inside a leather credential holder. It had been revealed through every decision made before the badges were ever opened. No badge, no title, and no position could erase what had already happened inside the diner that morning. The silence remained unbroken until the sound of tires rolling across the gravel parking lot drifted through the front windows. A pair of dark government sport utility vehicles turned slowly into the lot and parked near the entrance. Several men and women wearing business attire stepped out, each carrying a professional composure that immediately drew attention without demanding it. Marcus Bennett glanced briefly toward the window before looking back at Officer Ryan Mercer. "It appears our colleagues have arrived," he said quietly. The front door opened, and a distinguished woman in her early 50s entered with measured confidence, accompanied by 2 additional federal investigators. She surveyed the room once before her eyes settled on Marcus and Isaiah. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said calmly. "I apologize for the delay." Marcus stood for the first time since the encounter had begun and offered a respectful nod. "Good morning, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter. We experienced an unexpected interruption during breakfast." Her attention shifted toward Ryan, whose expression revealed that he had already realized the situation had moved far beyond his expectations. Without raising her voice, Evelyn spoke with quiet professionalism. "Officer, I understand there has been an interaction involving my colleagues." Ryan attempted to answer. "I did not realize." Evelyn gently lifted one hand, not to silence him but to indicate that she wished to speak in an orderly manner. "There will be an opportunity for everyone to provide a complete account. We prefer facts over assumptions." She then turned toward the owner of the diner. "Sir, does your establishment utilize security cameras?" The owner nodded immediately. "Yes. Every public area is recorded." "Would you be willing to preserve the recordings from this morning?" she asked politely. "Absolutely," he replied without hesitation. Evelyn thanked him before looking toward the customers throughout the dining room. "If anyone has independently recorded any portion of this encounter, we appreciate your willingness to retain those recordings. They may assist in ensuring that every detail is reviewed accurately." Several customers quietly acknowledged her request. The delivery driver raised his telephone. "I recorded almost everything after the conversation started," he said. The elderly veteran spoke next. "My wife and I watched the entire encounter from our table." One by one, additional voices confirmed that they had witnessed the events from beginning to end. Marcus looked around the diner with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Independent witnesses help ensure that truth belongs to everyone, not merely to those with authority. Ryan remained standing in complete silence. For the first time that morning, he found himself surrounded not by people questioning 2 strangers, but by ordinary citizens calmly confirming what they had personally observed. Evelyn looked toward him with the same professional courtesy she had shown everyone else. "Officer Mercer, this is not a courtroom, nor is it a place for conclusions. It is simply the beginning of a careful review. Professional accountability protects good officers just as surely as it addresses poor decisions." Marcus nodded in agreement. That has always been the purpose. The atmosphere inside the diner slowly began to change. The fear and uncertainty that had filled the room only minutes earlier gave way to something steadier. People were no longer watching a confrontation. They were witnessing a process built on evidence, patience, and fairness. In that quiet Georgia diner, surrounded by untouched breakfasts and ordinary Americans who had simply come for a meal, everyone present learned the same unforgettable lesson. Real authority never fears the truth, because the truth does not need to raise its voice to be heard. The breakfast that had gone untouched for nearly an hour was finally served again, not because anyone had forgotten what had happened, but because life had quietly begun moving forward. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter thanked the owner, the staff, and every customer who had chosen patience over speculation and honesty over convenience. Arrangements were made to preserve the security recordings, collect voluntary witness statements, and document every detail according to established procedure. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was assumed. Every step reflected the principle Marcus Bennett and Isaiah Brooks had demonstrated from the very beginning, that justice is strongest when it is careful. Officer Ryan Mercer remained standing in thoughtful silence. The certainty that had filled his voice when he first approached the booth had been replaced by something far more difficult to confront. For the first time that morning, he appeared to understand that authority alone could never justify a decision. Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the entire encounter. There was no anger in his eyes, no satisfaction, and no desire to embarrass another officer in front of a room full of strangers. "Officer Mercer," Marcus said quietly, "every person who wears a badge represents something larger than themselves. That responsibility belongs to all of us, regardless of which agency we serve." Ryan lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "I understand that now." Marcus gave a slight nod. "I hope you do. Because if Isaiah and I had been exactly who you believed we were when we walked through that door, the outcome should have been no different." Those words settled across the diner more deeply than any announcement could have. They reminded everyone listening that dignity should never depend upon a person's occupation, appearance, or credentials. It belongs to every individual before a single question is ever asked. The waitress returned with fresh coffee and warm breakfasts, apologizing softly that the first meal had grown cold. Marcus smiled warmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. Thank you for your kindness." Isaiah laughed quietly as he picked up his fork for the first time that morning. "After everything we have experienced, I think these may be the most well-earned pancakes in Georgia." The comment drew gentle laughter throughout the restaurant, finally breaking the tension that had filled the room for nearly an hour. For the first time since Officer Ryan Mercer had walked through the front door, the familiar sounds of the diner slowly returned. Coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. Conversations resumed in quiet voices. Someone called for another refill, while the cook disappeared back into the kitchen with a relieved smile. Even the owner allowed himself a long breath before promising that breakfast would be on the house. Marcus politely declined the offer. "We truly appreciate the generosity," he said. "But we pay our way just like everyone else." A few minutes later, after finishing the meal they had originally stopped to enjoy, Marcus and Isaiah stood, thanked the staff once again, and walked toward the entrance. As they reached the door, the elderly veteran rose from his table and offered Marcus a firm handshake. "Thank you," he said simply. Marcus returned the handshake with quiet respect. "Thank you for paying attention. Sometimes justice is protected by ordinary people who are willing to tell the truth." Outside, the morning sun shone as brightly as it had before the first word had ever been spoken inside the diner. The federal vehicles pulled away toward the meeting that had always been waiting for them, while Maple Corner Diner slowly returned to its familiar rhythm of coffee, conversation, and ordinary life. Yet no one who had shared breakfast that morning would ever see an ordinary traffic stop, a police badge, or a stranger sitting across a diner booth in quite the same way again. They carried home a lesson that reached far beyond one encounter in a small Georgia town. Character reveals itself long before credentials do, respect should never require proof, and the strongest badge anyone can wear is the quiet choice to treat another human being with dignity before learning who they are. Because in the end, the law may identify a person's authority, but only integrity reveals whether they truly deserve it. Some stories stay with us because they remind us that respect should never depend on appearances, assumptions, or titles. The way we choose to treat another person often says far more about us than it ever does about them. Long after the details of this story fade, that simple truth is worth carrying with us. What lesson from this story resonated with you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments, we would genuinely love to read them. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We look forward to seeing you again here on HOA Stories.